Hey there, I'm Kardino, and welcome back to my Paper Mario critique. Today, we're taking a look at a game which nobody really seems to feel indifferent about. Either you think this game is an underrated classic, or you think it should be purged in the fiery depths of hell. Well, today, I'm going to take a look at this game from a more critical perspective to see if it holds up to its predecessors. Real quick, if you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, I'll be making some references to those videos here, so I'd recommend watching them first. That being said, let's get started. Super Paper Mario. It's the third game in the now beloved Paper Mario series and often the most overlooked. I think the main reason for this is because from a gameplay perspective, it really plays nothing like its other classics or the newer laughing stocks. It's funny, I grew up with Super Paper Mario as my first game in the series, but replaying it in succession to the two other games, I can really see why people might dislike the game, especially if they're expecting another entry in the vein of Thousand Year Door. First of all, this game takes every single gameplay development the previous two games had built up and throws it into the garbage. Gone are the beloved 3D worlds and turn-based combat replaced with 2D platforming and real-time battles. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I think the best place to begin is the story. Basically, there's this guy called Count Bleck, and he's using an ancient book of evil to destroy the world, called the Dark Prognosticus. It foretells that if evil and purity are ever united in love, all worlds will face their ends. And so what does this Count do? He kidnaps Peach and Bowser and hypnotizes them so that they're forced to get married. So now it's up to Mario to travel to the different dimensions and collect the 8 pure hearts to combat the power of chaos. Now, like I said, this game is pretty different from the others because the gimmick of this game is switching from 2D to 3D. In 3D, you can dodge enemy attacks easier, explore more of the world, and find hidden secrets. I find it funny how Nintendo thought this would be a major selling point for the game, like, look, you can now see more than ever before thanks to the newfangled 3D exploration! The thing is, they seem to forget the 3D was not a new thing. The 2D character in a 3D world was the entire gimmick of the first two games. In fact, Super uses the exact same engine as Thousand Year Door, and to add insult to injury, they took out the entire turn-based battle system and threw in this real-time stuff. So what do you call this? It's not a JRPG, it's not a regular RPG. At best, I can just describe it as a platformer with RPG mechanics. And I think these are the reasons why so many people dislike these games, because it didn't really have a matching identity. In fact, the drastic change in gameplay makes this probably the easiest game out of the three, as well as the shortest, clocking in at about 14 hours compared to TTYD's 20. Now, there is one other aspect that a lot of people didn't like, and if you've played this game, you've probably guessed what it is: the pixels. The pixels are a sort of crossover between Curses and Partners from Thousand Year Door. Now, I suppose one could say that they have some personality to them, but for the most part, they're as transparent as they appear. And what's more, they almost seem like a copy-paste job. They're the same pumped, full of energy, talkative characters who got stuck in a chest 1500 years ago, waiting to lend their power to the legendary hero. I really couldn't care less about these guys. They feel slapped on last minute. Koops from Thousand Year Door, who barely spoke after his chapter, had more personality than all these things combined. In fact, there are only about 3 pixels who even stand out when you meet them. There's the Italian one who you free from forever being trapped in the bathroom without toilet paper. That aged well. There's this hammer dude who shouts whatever 10-character word or phrase you give him. And then there's Tippy, who's, spoiler alert, not even a pixel and mostly just acts as the voice for Mario. But again, it doesn't really matter because with the exception of Tippy, none of them will utter a single word after you first meet them. And when there's around 10 or so of these dudes, it's really easy to forget about them. Now, whatever you take from this video, I don't want you to think that I hate Super Paper Mario or even dislike it. But for the sake of neutrality, I found it important to explain why this game was so controversial, especially among hardcore fans. That being said, there is a lot about this game that I found enjoyable, and even better in some aspects than TTYD. For example, I really like how unique all the worlds and characters are. Now, I know some people don't like the designs of some of these characters, but I really don't mind them, and think they're a nice departure from the standard Mario cast. And besides, it makes sense because when you're visiting different dimensions, obviously people are probably going to look different. And they have different stories too, like in one character you visit a prehistoric mountain range filled with caveman residents who talk like they're high frat bros. I find it awesome how the writers even made slang for these dudes. It makes most of them really likable and adds some nice comic relief. Oh, but we'll get to you later. Then there's this entire chapter where your partner gets kidnapped by this chameleon otaku who gets a hard-on for butterflies. I just like to take a moment to say how great this game's writing is. Like, this stuff went right over 10-year-old me's head, but you invade this guy's castle and it's covered in action figures and manga, and the security questions he makes you answer are just priceless. And then you go into his private room and he's caged your butterfly friend and taking pictures while telling her to shake that thorax. Man, I just feel dirty just saying that, but there it is in an E-rated Nintendo game. Yeah, kinda like TDYD, this game got away with a lot of stuff for its rating. Speaking of creepy, I really like the presentation here. It combines the papercraft mechanics with digital aesthetics, and it's a really nice blend in my opinion. It lends itself pretty well to the platforming that makes up the bulk of the gameplay, along with the more than passable level design. But of course, I've got to talk about the actual story of the game, so here's your spoiler warning and timestamp. Talk to any Paper Mario fan, and they'll tell you that regardless of the gameplay, the game's overall story is on par with TTYD's, if not better. It's about this Romeo and Juliet-esque couple named Lumiere and Timpani who were forbidden by their societies to ever marry. However, when they ignored these rules, Timpani was cursed to forever wander between dimensions, until she was saved and transformed into the Tippy you play with throughout the game. Meanwhile, Blumiere, in his grief and outrage, opens a forbidden book of his tribe, the Dark Prognosticus, which proceeds to possess him, transforming his soul into the Count Bleck we all know and love. Additionally, there's a surprise villain at the end who ends up backstabbing the Count and becomes the actual final boss. The entire game ends on a bittersweet climax where Blumiere is defeated and in an attempt to set things right, sacrifices himself and the willing Timpani so that all worlds may live on. Now, that's a pretty good overarching story, but each world also has their own narrative, as seen by the nerd chameleon example I mentioned earlier. Like, remember that one chapter where Mario literally gets sent to hell and has to escort an angel to heaven, which is under attack by what is essentially Satan, and her parents made it a person in order to hide it from evil? The moment when she has to accept that her life was essentially a lie was pretty heart-wrenching and makes you even more determined to see all worlds saved. Or as one last example, in one of the chapters you have to fight in this massive gauntlet in order to earn the pure heart. But then, before you're even halfway through, your time runs out and the entire world is erased by the void of chaos. You go back there and it's just nothing. All you see around you is a blank sheet of paper, and in the background, one of Nintendo's most eerie tracks to date floats in the air. Like, who puts a failing heart monitor in their song? And it's not like these people all just died either. You don't see them in heaven, you don't see them in hell, they are simply erased from existence. It's a really surreal and frightening experience since, for the first time, Mario has actually failed in his mission, and if he doesn't hurry up, this will be what happens to everywhere else. In fact, I'd say the only thing that's nearly as creepy is descending into the River Twigs. But of course, not every moment of this gameplay is perfect, which is why it's time for round 2 of... Okay, so one thing I will applaud this game over is how they pretty much took out most forms of mandatory backtracking. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't repetitive parts in the game. Like, at one point you're forced to work as an underpaid workman who needs to pay off a debt of 1 million rubies. The solution to this circumstance? press the jump button 100 times or so, then hold right for about 10 to 15 minutes. Now, I wasn't about to spend a quarter hour of my time doing nothing, so I took some binoculars and a Bluetooth speaker, made a contraption so the D-pad was always being pressed, and went off to eat chili and watch some quality YouTube. Here's the thing though, this shouldn't be happening! If your player is actively coming up with ways to not play the game in order to advance it, that's a pretty good indication that your game isn't fun. Oh, you want another example? Well, I'll give you another example. So this prehistoric mountainscape that I mentioned, well, there's this one super dumb puzzle, quote unquote, in it, for lack of a better word, which requires you to find a specific villager so he can tell you a special code. So you get the code from the sky and it works. But then, you find a repeat of the first puzzle and it turns out that it requires a different solution. So you go back to this asshole and he requires you to manually type the word please 5 times using the on-screen keyboard and your Wiimote's D-pad. But then, he also requires you to get a piece of paper so that you can write down this obnoxiously long password that has no reason to be as random as it is. Look, I'll be the first to tell you that this entry isn't bad or even mediocre. It's still good and in my opinion still deserves the title of its predecessors. But when people say it doesn't play like a Paper Mario game, but feels like one, this is what they mean. It had the potential to be something on par, if not better than Thousand Year Door, but it got so caught up in having a bunch of gimmicks that ended up hurting itself in the long run. Like, aside from the narrative aspect, why is Luigi playable? All he has to offer is a higher jump than Mario, and even Peach and Bowser, aside from having some pretty great dialogue, really don't serve the gameplay too much at all besides just being different degrees of easy mode. And with the severe lack of difficulty originally, we're talking 10-year-old difficulty here. And as far as a 2D, 3D mechanic that was supposed to make this game unique, never in my playthrough did I think, wow, this game really benefits from being able to play in 3D. Aside from 2 bosses in the entire game, one of which is an optional carbon copy of the other. And as one final example, why does Mario need a pixel in order to swing his hammer? This is something that I could do basically from the start of the previous games. Like I said, this game has gimmicks for the sake of having gimmicks. It's still well worth playing, and in my opinion is still better than Paper Mario 64 retrospectively speaking, but I can only imagine how much better it would be if it had stuck with its roots. Okay, that's enough anime for one day. And with that, my Paper Mario Critique series has come to a close. I'd like to sincerely thank you all for watching these videos. If you did enjoy what you saw, please be sure to like and subscribe, and also share these videos out with anyone who might find them interesting. Also, tell me what you thought of Super Paper Mario, or any of this series in general. I'm looking forward to what you have to say. With all that being said, I'll just end things off by saying thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.